Hello, folks, and welcome to Blitzscaling a Startup. I'm Chris Ye, and I'm here today with something particularly wonderful, which is my friend Nancy Duarte. And Nancy is a wonderful woman. She's also a legend. Many would call her one of the world's best communicators.
Except my husband.
You are amazing. He worships the ground that you walk on, rightly so. And he is so wonderful. But as I was saying, so Nancy, of course, is the founder and CEO of Duarte Inc., which is one famous for making presentations, probably the most famous presentations in the world. For example, if you guys remember Al Gore's presentation on climate change, which became an inconvenient truth, that was Nancy's work. And she has worked for a bevy of other incredibly famous people who are known as the world's greatest communicators. But Nancy is actually their secret weapon. And I'm proud to be able to say that Nancy is also a personal friend. I have visited her office before, where she's broadcasting from now. She is also an amazing cook, a phenomenal hostess, and just one of the badass women of the world that I am proud to be associated with. Nancy, welcome to Blitzscaling a Startup.
Well, that was very kind. It's so fun to see you for the second time this week. So
that's the irony, folks. Nancy and I actually saw each other in person earlier this week. We were just together and we were commenting, it's so funny. If we really thought about it carefully, knew we were going to be at this conference together, we could have recorded it simultaneously. But of course, that would mess up all the timing of the streams and all the marketing planning that had gone into it. So we didn't do it, but it was still great to see you in person.
You too.
So, Nancy, I mean, as always with these interviews, there's like a script that I'm supposed to follow. I'm not really good at following those. You probably heard that from Julian. So I think that the first thing I want to start with is not what's on the script, but rather, how did you become this amazing communicator? Where did it begin? And how did this bring you into this world? Because I don't know if when you were growing up and you were a little girl, you said, someday I am going to be the person who creates the world's most viewed presentations, who backs the world's most famous and persuasive speakers. That's not something I would have thought when I was young.
Yeah. I have another employee who says presentations found me. And I think that's how I feel. So, not to go into the, sappy backstory, but I was raised in an economically and emotionally starved environment, and I always dreamed about going to college. I remember I used to lay in the grass and just say the word sophomore over and over. I just thought it sounded so cool, so I wanted to be one. And I went to when you're raised by a narcissistic mother, one of the things I found out is that a narcissist is missing the empathy gene. And so I think my life's work has really been in a quest to understand empathy. So no one else had to pay a price I had to pay, by being in proximity to a narcissist. So everything I make has a model that you can keep in your mind's eye that's empathy first. And I think that all of that led me to, I did go to college. I took speech communications at the University of Southern Mississippi because I spent time in Mississippi, high school and a year of college. And I made a C- in speech communication and a D in English. And now I write books in English about speech communication. But it was like a scarlet letter, Chris. I mean, it was like, I just felt embarrassed. And I dropped out and got married at 18. I just was done. I needed out of my house. And I always loved presenting. I always felt comfortable presenting, but I never knew I would have a business. And so that did this. And so when we got a Mac, and I started to call people right when the Mac came out, it still had jaggy fonts and everything. Apple was my first customer because there was a crack and a gap in time where proper graphic designers thought the Mac was stupid. They thought it was dumb, right? Because it didn't do letters well. And, we just jumped into that gap right at the right time. And Apple happened to be the first company who projected slides at scale from a computer, because they used to be 35 millimeter slides back in the day. And so then 92, so that was 88, 92, Apple had a huge layoff, and they scattered across the Silicon Valley and took me with them. And so that was just like this flashpoint of growth in the business. And that's kind of how it all began. As a little girl, I did escape. So I used to, I found an abandoned desk and I put it in my little bedroom, and I would sit and play. I would trace coloring books and file them and organize them and find a pattern in them, which is exactly what I do now for a living. So that's why I have so much passion around what I do. It feels sometimes like playing to me when I get to do the work I do. So that's kind of the long roundabout way of answering how I end up where we are.
That is pretty amazing. And I've known, some of the quote unquote you call it sappy, I would call it inspiring backstory. But I never heard the little piece about you with the desk and the playing of doing that. That is so evocative. I love it. It's the kind of detail that makes a story in a presentation sing.
I think we all, I mean, maybe you feel that way. I think sometimes as entrepreneurs, how we played when we were young is somehow is related to what we wind up doing and what we become if you really enjoy what you do. Because think about the energy and passion and commitment and the ups and downs of being an entrepreneur. I mean, we have our high highs and we have some low lows, and not everyone can handle that. And so I think, I mean, you're resilient. Like we've all come to a place where we build resiliency from the life we've lived,
Absolutely. And one of the things I often tell people is there better be something you enjoy about entrepreneurship, because chances are it's not going to pay off monetarily. Now, in your case, it has, but in many cases, it doesn't.
Yeah.
And if you come to the end of it and you're like, wow, I really haven't made much money, and I've been doing things I didn't like this entire time, that would be gutting. I'm just horrendous.
Yeah.
So there were a couple of people are starting to put in questions because, again, you are a LinkedIn top voice, which is a very big deal, which is why it's such a big deal to have you on. Thank you for being willing to come on. There were a couple of questions that people had asked. So the first question that somebody had asked, and I'm sorry, I can't remember your name exactly because it's not this big. Here we go. Melissa, who may be someone you know, Nancy, asks, how did the two of you meet? So I can tell the story or you can tell the story. What's your preference?
You tell it.
Okay. So, long ago in 2014, I published a book called The Alliance. It's written with my friends Reid Hoffman and Ben Kasnoka, and it's all about the relationships between managers and employees and employers and employees. And it's been pretty influential in the HR world, which is very cool. And I've gotten to travel around the world talking about the book. Well, once the book came out, my friend Peter Sims, who I'd known for a decade before then, came to me and said, hey, we have this special gathering of authors that we'd like to invite you to. And I'm like, well, who's in this? And he mentioned some of the names. I'm like, I know a lot of these people. Nobody's told me anything about this.
This is like a society.
This is a secret society. Oh my God. Well,
it's a guild at its finest.
I've got to go to this thing. And in fact, the very first meeting of this secret society I went to was at your house. And that is, I believe, the first time we met in person. I mean, it's always possible we run into each other somehow, but that was the first time I remember us meeting in person.
Yeah. That was a very, very significant moment too for this group, because then it spun out into this big that's where we were Monday. It was a bigger global collaborative now. It's just, I didn't realize that was your first one.
That was my very first one. And, again, my background, I have a background in improvisational comedy. And the whole thing about improv is that you need to say yes to what's happening in the world.
Yeah.
Right. You don't block it and say no, you say yes.
Yeah.
And so when Peter Sims, our mutual friend, who we should do more than just get together every couple of months and complain about our publishers and agents.
You said it, I didn't.
That was what Peter said. It's okay. They know that that's what authors do. That's just their nature. But if we should do more than just get together every couple of months and complain, we should try to make change in the world. And that's what started us down the road to what eventually became the Black Sheep, which is where Nancy and I were earlier this week, talking with amazing folks who are award-winning filmmakers, best-selling authors, titans of industry, private equity founders, and the like. And just
curated beautifully.
And in the shadow of the Golden Gate Bridge, just an amazing experience. And so Nancy and I have known each other now for, I would guess, this is now going to be our second decade. It's been an entire 10 years. And now we're entering our second decade of knowing each other. And it's been a huge privilege, because for those of you who are watching, if you don't know Nancy in person, what you're seeing is what you're getting. Nancy is warm, open, generous, giving, and all these wonderful things.
Stop.
It's all true, though. And of course, we mentioned briefly Nancy's husband, Mark, who is also just an amazing guy. And it's inspiring for me as a husband, as part of a couple, to see people who have such great love for each other, great love for family. So
happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
Happy Valentine's Day. Claudia mentions when passion feels like play. And I think that's probably a good way of putting it. I mean, Nancy, you're pretty excited most of the time. I mean, there's a lot of crap that we have to deal with as a leader. I often tell people being CEO is like the worst job in the world. Because if you're caring and responsible, you are carrying this immense burden of responsibility. And you, I know, have shepherded your company through some tough times. I mean,
all fingers point to the CEO, right? And what's interesting is I think a lot of employees, a lot of people like status quo. They want things to stay the same for a long time. And there's no way I would have been in business now since 1988 and thriving most of those years. I've only had 1 year where we broke even, and then 1 year where we lost $14. So it's been, you would call it, relatively successful business. But if I hadn't adapted, and I would say put my company through a form of reform or a form of reinvention about every 4 years. So it's almost like it's doing something really new every 4 years. In these cycles, it's like a pond would go stagnant, and it needs this flow of fresh innovation and ideas. And so you're right. I mean, and that has its own, by its nature, the S curve of innovation has its own undulating demand that it puts on a leader. And I have a good team. I have a good leadership team that surrounds me.
And, that really ties in. Now I'm going to be self-promotional for a second. So I have this concept I've been working on called Becoming an Infinite Learner, that is an offshoot of blitzscaling, which is all about how people who are successful need to be willing to adapt and change, to unlearn the lessons of success, which is so hard to do. And here you are the most successful person in the world in your field. And you're telling us you're reinventing yourself every couple of years, and you're reinventing your firm every couple of years. It'd be easy for you to say, I created the first PowerPoint or first keynote pitch that won an Oscar. Mic drop. But you don't do that, right? Instead, you're constantly looking to change what you're doing, to evolve. That's why you've done things like write this incredible best-selling book, Slideology, that shares so many of your secrets, because you and I both know the secret behind that is you could put all of this into a book, but nobody reads this stuff. They want to hear it straight from the horse's mouth. So a book is even better for sharing your ideas and getting people to want you to help them than anything else in the world.
It's air cover for sure.
Now, you also do your books a little differently than the rest of us, because your books are, by definition, often very visual. They often have a lot in it. What does it take to create a book like Slideology? And by the way, where can people find a copy of that?
Oh, so I have 7 books. So we do have a books page on my website at duarte.com that gives an overview of all of them. And they're available at where all books are sold. And it is true, I don't have audiobooks of my books. Publishers like me because they're kind of forced to buy the printed book, and publishers are, a little outdated. They don't know how to do a whole lot of the other stuff. But literally what I do, which is just maybe shocking, is I build my books in PowerPoint. So my books are 9x9 square full color books. So I build a 9x18 deck, and then I build it. Actually, it's 18 by about 12, because I leave the bottom of the screen for references and stuff. And so every spread in my book is almost like a slide, like a very dense slide. So there's a title, and then everything on the page supports the title. But the book itself creates a really beautiful arc. If you were just read across the titles of them all, it's pretty insightful. It's different. And I think it's just because I'm so entrenched in PowerPoint. All my books are like that. They're like Slide Docs, which is also a book that's only online. You can go to slidedocs.com and get that. But that's how I make them. I'm very visual. I think when a visual accompanies words, if you can see what I'm saying, we could either agree or disagree. So sometimes it's like, hey, let me just draw this on a whiteboard. And the reason we do that is it's like, this is what I see in my mind's eye. Somebody else can jump up and say, well, they could wipe part of it out and say, no, this is what I see in my mind's eye. If you co-create something visual together, you have alignment. If you leave the room with that ratified. And I think the same is with my books. I pose a solution in a visual way that you could remember what I'm trying to say. So every page has visuals, rich visuals, concepts, creativity, all that stuff. Yeah. So I have some time. Yeah.
And I think that's so important because, I think that somebody like you is incredibly visual as a thinker and can picture these things. One of the reasons why you're able to work this way is because you can picture it in your mind. The renderer that is your brain is capable of producing a vision, which you can then reproduce electronically.
Yeah.
But most other folks in this world don't have that degree of visual skill. And so they have to see it, right? They have to see it in order to understand it, to get it, to process it. And your ability to do that gets past what I often warn people about, which is, well, if you just describe it in words, you have to be very, very precise because it's very easy for the brain to fill in the blanks. And that's why writing a book is so much more difficult than just talking with people, because you don't have a chance to let people just fill in the blanks or wave your hands. You've got to actually make it real. And the visual side is the best way to make it real for something.
It helps. And you still have to unpack it a lot. So we have a new book that came out of Duarte. I have two gals who wrote a book on listening. It's unbelievably powerful. I highly recommend adaptive listening. It's launching in a week. It's going to start to ship the end of this month. But that was what they said. So they worked with these high performing executives, the most powerful people that get on stages. And this is my writing team, my storytelling, two gals that have done storytelling in that nature for a long, long time. And they talk about the journey it was to learn how to be like, oh, I can't say a super concise one sentence. I have to unpack that one sentence paragraphically, give examples, make it like readable. It was different to go from spoken wordable to readable, but they really, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful body of work. And we're trying to change the brand from like Nancy means Duarte to Duarte means a house of experts. And so that's why these gals, they just killed it. It's amazing. It's a book and a course. It's great. And that's to your point, right? You could either just throw a visual up there and let people assume a whole lot about the visual, or you have to really unpack the words that go with it. So I completely agree.
Well, the funny thing is, my friend Ramit Sethi, who of course is also a best-selling author, has this podcast, I Will Teach You to Be Rich, where he has couples on to talk about money issues. And it's really fascinating because, this is the thing that nobody talks about. You get lots of people to talk about sex. You can't get people to talk about money, dear God. And what is fascinating, and this is a running joke now, is they'll come on the show and they'll have decided to bare their souls for an audience of millions, and they still won't have read his book in advance. He's like, it's $20. It's not that long. You're willing to bare your soul, to reveal your entire finances to the world. You're not willing to pick up a book for $20 and just read it. What is going on with this?
Maybe that's part of it. Maybe he gets to unpack the concepts in his book because they hadn't, It's interesting.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we did together, we've done a number of things together, but one of the things we did together is you're actually part of a very special group that we assembled from the Silicon Guild, which is what we call the authors branch of the Black Sheep. And it was a very special group we assembled to do one of the first reviews of the manuscript that eventually became Blitzscaling, of course, my most famous book. And you were part of that group. We gathered in a secret, undisclosed location, largely because I don't remember the name of the restaurant. And we talked about the book. And, one of the things that was useful is that you were providing a perspective that we didn't think about a lot, because we live in the world of traditional Silicon Valley startups where venture capital is almost assumed, and all the most valuable companies in the world, including ones which have all hired you over the years, took venture capital financing. But you have bootstrapped Duarte the entire time. I'm sure people have offered you gobs and gobs of money to buy in, and you have resolutely said no. And so I'm very curious to understand a little bit more about that. Talk about, did you seek investment at any point in time? At what point did you realize, you know what? I think we're good. I mean, I can cover
Yeah.
that $14 loss if I have to.
I love this question, and especially coming on the backside of your comments about Sethi, because my husband and I have certain belief systems about money, to the point where even in like our will, we unpacked it over a series of 5 pages. So our belief systems about money would transfer to our children. And one of them is, there's a great sacred text that says the borrower is slave to the lender. And so my husband and I have always not liked debt. And we've also felt like if we retained ownership, we retain control. So my ability to be able to pivot, and reinvent myself in the future, I get to do that. I get to do that. I don't have to, I am the sole stakeholder. And there's a lot of autonomy and a lot of reason why I'm still in business because of that. So we just never spend more than we make. And we've been able to scale. We had rip snot growth when my TED Talk came out, when people found out we were the ones that did Inconvenient Truth. It was like, whoosh. And now we've kind of steadied. And then, COVID looks like beep, beep, beep. Like the last few years are really up and down on our numbers. Yeah. But now I've put in the engine and the marketing team to actually scale again. And so the good news is we don't, we keep cash in the bank. I keep it there. We have the ability that if the company did have any sort of crisis, I could loan it enough to keep it going for 3 years. So it's like when all of these hits were happening and people were like, oh my God, I was just like I was snoring, assuring my team, we're doing smart things to make sure we're operating under our, revenue numbers, but I don't lose sleep over money. I just don't lose sleep over it. And I think that that's a way to understand that it's a form of actually not loving it so much or spending so much of it that you live beyond your means. So when we were starting it, Chris, I mean, we lived in a 1-room studio apartment with really ugly long shag carpet, vinyl flooring that was ripped up. My daughter slept on, her bed was a day bed in our living room, so it doubled as our couch. And we didn't move from there. My husband schlepped furniture, extra jobs, so he could pay for the Mac. Like we didn't overextend ourselves. And I just think a lot of people want the high life, and then we moved from there to one that had a bedroom. And we worked from there for a long, long time, no air conditioning. And we worked from there for a long time, and no house help. I had nobody to help me clean. We did it all. And I just think that you just don't live beyond your means. And I think people make decisions to do that. Like if I were starting over in the Silicon Valley, I would probably be that person that paid $1,000 for a tent to live in a tent in someone's backyard. I wouldn't be paying for the $7,500 studio apartment that it takes in Mountain View today. Like I would rent a room. My whole family would rent a garage or something. And people that's just not the norm. But that's what you have to do if you want to retain autonomy. And there is a movement, it, where people aren't going to VCs. They're having better luck with, the family funds and bootstrapping now with AI and everything, and how less expensive it's going to be able to build tech. I was listening to the guys on the All In podcast, and like they're predicting the trend is that people aren't going to need as much funding because they're going to be able to get really far on their own. And so I just think things are going to really shift. Everything's kind of shifting right now.
My partner, Jeremiah Ouyang, who you probably have met at some point in time.
I was at a conference with him a couple months ago. Yeah, he's
there
great.
You go.
Yeah.
Jeremiah has made the prediction, I think he's not alone in this, that there will be billion-dollar companies with 3 or fewer employees in the near future, because so much will be accomplished via AI, which is both incredible and amazing, but also a little scary, because it used to be if a billion-dollar company existed, it created hundreds or thousands of jobs along the way.
Exactly. It's getting weird. I mean, it's going to get weirder before it gets normalized for sure.
So you touched on a couple of things, and I always believe that, behind the curtain is so fascinating as well. It's something that people really need to know. We've talked a little bit about Mark and your husband, Mark Duarte. And it's really been this partnership, and it's adapted and adjusted over the years like everything else. But talk about the importance of having that kind of partnership in your life. How has that affected your path?
I love that question. So, because I was the one just always in it, like I was the strategist, the leader, the account person, like I just did it all early on in the entrepreneurship. And then he kind of doubled down on IT and accounting, which had a lot more flexibility back in the day. So as a partner to me, he, I could be all caught up in meetings or having to go to evening things or whatever. And then he would pick up the kids. He kept that going, and which has been really, really important for me to be able to work hard and not have like the mom guilt kind of a thing. And as an organization, when we were growing, there were moments that were really, really hard. I would go 24 hours, 36 hours, sometimes 2 days and not even come home. Sometimes we had to work through the night to get that, usually guy, too bad, to get that guy on the stage.
We're not going to name any famous names or their
no
distinctive clothing.
Over here, can't name them.
Nope.
But we had, you had to work really, really hard. And there were these moments where I felt like I wasn't there for my kids. And there was this very poignant moment where I woke up. I always had breakfast, always had dinner with my kids, or tried to, but sometimes I had to skip it. And there was this poignant moment where I was sitting at breakfast, and I'd come home the night before and the whole house was dark. Mark had tucked everyone in bed, fed them, and they were all asleep. And I went into the living room and cried into the carpet, as far away from my kids' room as possible. But I'm like, oh, I'm a terrible mom, and just felt horrible. Yeah. So I get up the next day having breakfast with her. And I said, oh, I feel so bad. I haven't been here for 2 days. What a terrible mom. I didn't even get to cook dinner with you or for you. And my little daughter, she's all spicy. She's probably 11. She stands up, she sticks her hand on her hip and she goes, Mom, I can learn how to cook on the Food Network show. She goes, from you, I'm learning how to communicate, because we would openly talk and problem solve in front of you. And she goes, that's changing my life. Just give yourself a break. And I was just like, I never felt bad again, because here I hadn't really valued this ecosystem. My husband is like tethers me. So he, I would say, has this sage advice, and his perspective is so different because I'm in this world all day long. And then he's my coach, my counselor, my friend, my love. Like he creates this environment to nurture my heart and my soul, which we've been talking about, the deep wounds and bruises that CEOs have to take. So he rebolsters me. So he's this, I guess you could call it a grounding device. And so I've had a really lovely, and I'm so grateful for this amazing little ecosystem of joy and happiness that he brings. He makes me laugh every day, and he makes me feel loved and accepted every day. And so many people don't have that. And I would say that's a form of fuel a lot of entrepreneurs don't talk about. So he has been a true support and partner. So he does own 50%. He's not involved, but he owns half. So we own 100%. I own 51%. Because we are definitely female-owned, female-run. Right. He owns 49%. So he has enough interest. He listens to me deeply because he cares, because this is like an investment, but he's not involved, which actually has its benefits for him to have an outsider perspective. So he golfs, paints. He's my Renaissance man. And
he's got the guitar as well.
Yeah, he's got the guitars.
Serenades you now and then.
Yeah, he does. And I just, he fuels me emotionally, spiritually. Very, very wise. And so, it's a big component to my success, is the load he bears in a very different way than I bear.
Yeah. And I think this is one of those things. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I ask these questions in these interviews, because we have, people like you who have achieved so much, and people look up to you, and they don't always recognize the importance of that support, of that partnership in people's lives.
Yeah. I'm very blessed.
Now, one of the other things that we've touched on a little bit is faith and spirituality, which is also something that's really important to you. And again, something that we don't talk about enough. How has that affected your journey? How have you been able to make that a part of your life as you go through, and you're working 36 hours, you're trying to help a guy with a very distinctive outfit get ready for his time on stage? Tell me more about this.
Yeah, that's a great question, because Chris and I served on the DEI committee for the Silicon Guild. And so I know we don't even share some of the same beliefs. So that was very generous for you to bring that up. I would say that I definitely have healthier, like when you're growing so fast, you don't have as much balance in your life. And I would say now I do. So I have a strong spiritual practice every day. I wake up, I listen to scriptures, listen to apply. And then all day long, I do think I have a highly tuned intuitive sense. Like I'm trying to do something right now I've never done in my life. And even though I have experts, I'm like, I still intuitively think this way is the right way. And I think a lot of that comes from, I feel that I'm tuned into a higher power a bit, not to get too woo-woo, but I definitely feel like there's times I tap in to like a otherworldly sense where I can, I just see things from a new perspective I would not have considered or could have even considered on my own. And so that brings me a lot of strength, a lot of joy, and a lot of grounding in what I do too. And I think everyone needs to have some sort of spiritual practice that makes them pause and possibly consider there's something greater than you. There is something greater than you that you can serve or greater. Because otherwise, if we are the greatest thing, that's a little frightening. And so I always try to be in service of something greater than myself, and in it for that. I've never was in it for the money. I happened to fall in love with something, and then it just happened to make money. And even if Mark and I are no happier when we had nothing, when we were in this tiny town in Chico, California, with retail jobs. Yeah. We're no happier having much than when we had little. And a lot of that, I think, is because of our faith, because it's really about waking up every day, doing what you feel brings you peace, and doing what brings you passion, and doing just that one thing every day. And I think that's been what I think has led us to where we are today.
Yeah.
Thanks for asking that. It was super nice.
No, my pleasure. Look, I think that it's great for the audience to hear this. And I also think, I think it would serve as a great summary, which is, of course, money is helpful. I'm never going to say that it is not. I tell people all the time, I've tried having money and not having money, and having money is a lot easier.
It has conveniences for sure.
It's much more convenient. There's nobody who's like, you know what, I'm sick of, because guess what? If you have a bunch of money, you can always just give it all away. Yeah. Or donate it. And you can very easily get to the state of not having money. People tend not to do that. But it's not the most important thing, right? Yeah. When I look at your life, I see love, faith, family, passion, service. As you pointed out, these are things that don't cost money. I think J-Lo was the one who said, love don't cost a thing. And this is something that, again, it's hard for people sometimes to remember that in a world where we're constantly hearing about earnings this, fundraising that, and market cap this.
Yeah.
So in thinking about the work that you do, there was one line of questioning that Julian put in, which he must have a very good reason for it, very insistent on this, which is talking about how you use Star Wars as a way of explaining storytelling. Very appropriate. We were with Ed Catmull recently, who had worked for Lucasfilm. That's where Pixar came from. Ed's amazing as well, one of our fellow Silicon Guild members. But talk to me about Star Wars and how Star Wars explains storytelling. How do you use that as a tool?
Yeah, Julian's funny. I don't know that he knew we knew each other, and he heard me talk about this on Mike Maples' podcast, and he's like, oh my God, that was so crazy. But, Star Wars is what I would call an epic tale, right? It transcends space and time. It covers multiple characters that live in this world. And in the different versions of it, there's mentors that come along. So there's a hero, Luke, who's like, he's in his ordinary world. He's threatened by the Death Star, jumps into this adventure. And there's a moment where they get stuck. And then a mentor comes along and helps them get unstuck. Yeah. And so in my TED Talk, I talk about the fact that in reality, presenters sometimes feel like I'm the hero. I'm well lit. I'm standing on a stage. I'm amazing. Everyone came to hear me. I'm awesome. And we think we're the hero in the room. But in reality, the audience is the hero of your idea, because if they leave without your idea adopted, your idea dies. So you really need them to become the hero of your idea. And so then the role of the presenter then is one of mentor. So we're the mentor, we're Yoda, right? We're Yoda and they are Luke Skywalker. We're not the ones really changing the world. They're the ones that are going to go out and change the world. But I actually think the better mentor in Star Wars is probably Obi-Wan Kenobi, because Obi-Wan Kenobi, so did Yoda. They both gave Luke two things. So in storytelling, The protagonist goes on what's called an inner journey and an outer journey. They are going through so much conflict. They have to get the resolve to keep going, which is an inner journey. But they also have to physically, there's a car chase, they slay a dragon, and there's usually a physical journey they're on. And then there's an emotional or spiritual journey that they're on. So there's an inner journey and an outer journey. And what a mentor does is he helps overcome one of those things. And what's cool about like Obi-Wan is he did both for Luke. He gave him a lightsaber for his physical journey, taught him how to use that. They both did. And a spiritual tool, which was the Force. And so that's what every presentation should do, is you should address their inner journey. Like, why are they going to resist? Are they my adversary or are they my ally? How are they going to, what can I do to help them get unstuck? And then it's the mindset, the heart, like, how do I do emotional or analytical appeal? How do I make sure they want to come with me? Because, Chris, every day, the entrepreneurs on this call, your employees and your customers wake up every day and they have to re-choose to choose you.
That's right.
Am I going to choose the Duarte brand, and am I going to choose to work for Nancy? They get to make that choice every day. And so if we're not showing up and fueling them with the right emotional fuel, I don't get it right all the time. We sure as heck try our butts off to get this as right as possible, but they get to make a choice every day. And so if you use storytelling and storytelling principles in your culture, it'll help retain employees and customers. It helps a whole heck of a lot. And so that's kind of all of the storytelling principles of Hero's Journey, especially Chris Vogler's body of work around that, are very dear to me, and very much infused into a lot of the work we do.
Yeah, and I think that this is a point I want to underscore even more, because you said it so eloquently. Every individual is on the hero's journey, and they're the protagonist in their own story.
Yeah.
The people that we work with in our daily lives, they may report to us, but in their story,
they're protagonists.
They're the protagonist. We're a supporting character.
Yeah.
And hopefully we're a supporting character that the audience likes, as opposed to one of the ones that's an obstacle to be overcome for our hero to ultimately triumph. Exactly. And we have to remember that all of us need to be the hero of that story. All of us are seeking that story. All of us are a little uncertain at times how that story is going to end, and we're worried about it. We hope there's going to be a happy ending, but we don't know. And so that is a really powerful metaphor for how to work with people in this world.
Yeah, it was like what Astro said on Monday, right? Will AI have consciousness? He goes, we'll never know, because I'm only conscious because I see through my own eyes, right? And that was such a profound thing. And so it's the same with our own story. We're so caught up in seeing everything through our own eyes that we struggle. And that's empathy at its finest, if we can get out of our own eyes. So there's a really less famous moment in Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey where the protagonist puts on the skin of their enemy. So you think about Star Wars again, they stormtroopers, the cast put on the stormtrooper outfit and they got access to the enemy's camp. Same with Wizard of Oz, right? They put on the little marching guys and they made it into the witch's castle. But like, my favorite though is Avatar. So when Jake put on the skin of his enemies, the Na'vi, the blue Na'vi, he's like, wait a minute, they're not our enemy. Right. They're not our enemy. And I think that's what leaders need to do, is we need to put the skin of someone else on so we see through their eyes. We're actually seeing through their eyes instead of our own. And we're looking at through someone else's consciousness and not our own. And I just thought that was a powerful comment that Astro made on Monday about I only know I'm conscious because I'm looking through my own eyes. And that was interesting.
Yes. And so, folks, we're talking about Astro Teller, the head of X, Google's Moonshot Factory, a fascinating individual who I also have told people is clearly a benevolent robot as opposed to a human being. He tries to do this on stage. He's like, oh, yes, can you tell which of us on stage is the robot? I'm like, you're not fooling me, Astro. I know that you're following the 3 laws of robotics.
That was genius. The whole day was great.
So let's talk about something that you had mentioned back at the beginning, and I want to circle back to it because I think it is so important, which is the notion of empathy. Yeah. Because I think that empathy undergirds everything. Empathy is what allows you to understand the story of the audience. Empathy is what allows you to build a business, build a family, build a life. Empathy is the thing that you felt like you didn't get when you're
Yeah.
growing up as a result of, the issues that your mother faced in mental health and things like that.
Yeah.
How do you express that empathy in your life now? What are the different ways in which it comes in from the outside and helps fuel you? And what are the ways that
Mhm.
you push it out there to help others on their journeys?
You are a super good podcast host. I just want to say, I love that you asked that. Nobody has asked me this. First thing is we've defined empathy at my organization, and it's based on my own belief of what empathy is. So empathy to me is know yourself, accept yourself, understand others, and then adapt to them. And so if you don't, the first step I think to empathy is knowing and accepting yourself. And
Yes.
we systemically at Duarte, we do value psychometrics. We don't judge you based on it. But what it is it's like, oh, that's why Nancy's showing up the way she is. Therefore, to adapt to her, I'm going to do this. Or then we openly talk about how we show up, why we show up the way we do. And when you couple that with storytelling, it's like, oh my gosh, there's a whole story that Nancy has about why empathy is at the center of her work. And then you understand me. And the more you get to know me, even though I show up super energetic and like a boss, you're like, oh, I get her intent. So when empathy and story are together, people are like, you know what? I understand her. I believe her now. I have empathy for her. And same with me. Empathy. So I'm now running. I've kind of trying to step away from some of my exec functions so I can reinvent the company again. And I have this small little team that I'm working with that aren't execs, though they're bright and they've been with me for a long time. So I'm having my head of people join those meetings so that when I leave, she can coach me. She's literally like, hey, this is how you're going to need to adapt, or this, and then she'll meet with them by themselves and say, hey, how does Nancy need to show up different? What do you need? And so I we this to work. I feel like this new thing I'm doing is going to be a very important thing for our future. And so we value empathy that much, Chris. It's like, how can I adapt? How can I show up different? And while I'm in a meeting, she'll observe and she'll be like, slow down, talk a little slower. I don't think that they understand you, unpack that a little more, literally live in real time. And it's really valuable to me. And it seems like a weird thing for her to spend her time on, but she too knows this thing. I got to get this team running like a nice, beautiful machine. And she's aiding in that. And it's very important to me.
Wow. So there's quite a quote that's just come up. I'm going to read it and then we're going to return to the discussion. The quote is from Corey Anderson, who is no doubt one of your great followers, who writes, fiction, in my opinion, is one of the most powerful gateways to empathy. I like to think that some of the strides in how more progressive our society and leadership has changed is due in small part to the empathy we felt in fiction.
Yeah. And it's fiction, but it's also real life.
Yeah.
Real life shaped in the shape of a story. I really think truth isn't that different from fiction unless they're talking about like sci-fi, fantasy. It has quite a bit more. They pull more on the supernatural powers. Some of them, some fiction, there's different conflict. There's, man against self, man against technology, man against, person against person. Like there's different conflicts. And so a lot of the fiction is, humans battling technology, which a lot of people are like, oh my God, that's why I think a lot of the world thinks technology could rule the world, is because we've been seeped so much.
Oh, yes. It's all the movies.
Yeah. So it has a supernatural, or sometimes people call it, man against God or fate or technology or machine, right? This otherworldly thing. And yeah, I think stories of real people who've really overcome roadblocks where people are like, I can be them. I can be that person. If I made the decisions that person made when I was in my messy middle of my story, I would turn out different. I could turn out like them if I started to make decisions like them. So we double down on the lesson of the story. So when you're trying to persuade or appeal someone to continue to follow you or continue to build with you your business, you need to kind of double down on what is the lesson I learned when I was exactly in their shoes right now. And you think, oh, that was the lesson I learned. Let me tell that personal story of how I overcome in the same moment they're in right now. Let me tell that story to motivate them. It's really kind of beautiful. So I agree fiction is powerful. And I also think, though, for using it in business to transform, real stories work just as powerfully.
Exactly. It's the
Yeah,
storytelling.
it's the
Fiction happens to
storytelling.
be a convenient way of telling stories because you get to make it up.
Yeah,
But there are great real life stories as well. We were just with filmmakers like
yeah,
Farhad Maybadi, who just put out Earthbound, which is an
yes, beautiful.
incredible story. We heard from the filmmaker Rocco Bellic, who is another incredible storyteller who's made award-winning movies, Academy Award nominated movies.
Mm-hmm.
And telling these stories really
Yeah,
gets to the heart of making people feel, which is what ultimately it's all about. We need to feel what others feel, but we need to
yeah.
help them feel what we feel.
And it's all in the editing. I just want to say, like, I can have dinner with someone and they'll tell a story, and it's like, if they shaped it differently,
Yeah.
it would be awe-inspiring. And what happens in the Academy Awards is once they name who wins editor, they know that that film has 85% probability of winning best film because
Mm,
it's all in the editing. So if there's any tip that people could leave with, it's like it's like shape your story, like shape and edit it and have it create the rise and fall of an arc. And then like that's one of the first steps in knowing how to tell a story is the shaping of it, the editing of it. And that's my tip of the day.
yes, I actually thought the tip was going to be if you're at an Oscar party and you want to win some money, make sure that once you find out who wins best editor, you make the bet on best film.
Exactly. Exactly.
In terms of empathy, one of the things that came to mind when you talked about this is you had this brilliant notion of you had your head of people come into the meetings with you. And I want to underscore that because what
Yeah.
you were doing is you were saying, oh, you know what? One of the challenges that we face in the world is a challenge of metacognition, which is we're doing something and we're thinking in that moment, but are we thinking about how we're thinking? Right? We can either act or we can analyze how we're acting. It's very difficult to do both at once. And so you're in the moment. And if you want to be in the moment, it's difficult to also be stepping back and analyzing it in a very
Yeah.
objective way. And so
Yeah.
having that coach, having somebody come in and help you with that metacognition is a really powerful tool.
Yeah. It's been amazing. It's been really helpful to me because I just think there's a lot at stake and I want this thing to really work out. And it's been fun. It's been fun.
Now, Nancy, we are coming to the end of our time together, which is
Oh,
very sad. Very
yeah.
sad. But before we go, there's always a couple of things that we want to make sure of. The first is there anything that we didn't talk about that you really wanted to talk about? Is there anything
Oh,
that, I failed to ask you about?
not really. I mean, I think if your audience is entrepreneurs, which I know right now it's hard to scale. And I think we talked quite a bit about the ups and downs of entrepreneurship. And
Mhm.
for me, I mean, other than not having to lose sleep about the cash, which is awesome, it's been hard. And so what I do to keep myself bolstered, believe it or not, is I write myself a rally cry every year, like literally a rally cry that's got things in it like you were born for such a time as this. Like you have to be like, and sometimes they're so personal and so deep. Like I've been tempted. I'm like, oh, I bet this would encourage other entrepreneurs. It's hard for me to even read it without it hitting like this really deep emotional nerve.
Mhm.
And so I just want to encourage everyone that it's just tough. It's tough for like everyone. And I just want to encourage them to keep themselves propped up and not right now there's such a mental game where people tear themselves down. They just tear themselves down. So I'd love everyone to do the best they can to stop any negative chatter and write like open letters to yourself, memos to yourself to keep your head in the game. Just keep your head in the game because I think we've got this. And I think we're going to come out to the other side completely changed. And I think the people listening are probably the ones that care the most about how they show up and what they do and the results they deliver. And I think there's a great opportunity for everyone to do that. That would be my kind of encouragement, I would call it.
Fantastic. And I just want to say, I mean, I think you see it in the comments on the stream, people talking about how much they've enjoyed this interview. A
Well,
lot of it is your willingness to be open and vulnerable. We talk a lot about vulnerability with our friend Peter Sims, but
yeah,
it really is true, right? It's when they see someone like you, an icon, a legend, and then they see that you're human like the
yeah,
rest of us, right? You've had to struggle, you've had hard times, and you still do, even though you have enormous success and fortunately you don't have to lose sleep about the money anymore. You're still out there trying to figure out, okay, how do I steer this company next? Yeah, we've been so successful for so many decades, but how do I make sure that this continues? How
Yeah,
do I make sure that that this team of people I built around me, this community,
exactly.
gets to continue to thrive?
Exactly.
And I think
It's
that
for
peek behind
them.
the curtain is really useful.
Yeah. It's for them. One of Duarte's values is to belong.
Yeah.
And if I make a stupid move, which I made a couple in the last couple
We
of
all
years,
do. We all
well,
do.
it impacts humans. And I'm in this to transform humans. So when a leader makes a dumb move, it impacts humans. And so that's why we need to do well, but we also need to be able to talk about, hey, don't be me. Don't make your decision the way I just did. And it helps other people to do that.
Absolutely. And again, I think that people sharing the real authentic experience they have, which
Yeah.
includes making mistakes, is so
Yeah, I don't
important.
have stakeholders. The only one that will
Yeah.
lose if I say something stupid's me. And so that's why I'm so happy I don't have stakeholders. I get to say whatever I want.
Exactly.
Some freedom in that. Yeah.
So the final thing that we always do in any podcast is make sure we plug the crap out of things. So because it's been a while since we mentioned it, can you talk to people about where on the Duarte website they can find you, where they can find Duarte, where they can find the books, where they can find you on social media or anywhere else that
Oh,
they can
that's so
take
nice.
in more of the awesomeness of you?
Well, I'm super active on LinkedIn. I have a newsletter you can subscribe to there. You can subscribe to Duarte's newsletter, duarte.com. There's great resources up there, tons of free stuff, free books. Some of my books are up there as multimedia books free. I mean, it's just this wealth of all kinds of stuff you could use. I'm at Duarte on Twitter, at Nancy Duarte on Twitter. And I'm not really active on Insta. I'm going to turn my Instagram channel on someday, just not there now. But yeah, I connect and I'm pretty active up on LinkedIn. And we do a lot of webinars, good content, like free content all the time. We're a bit of a content engine. So if you pop up there, you'll hear from me and you'll hear from my team a lot. We've been interviewing customers. It's just been fun. We've been having a good time. Got the good marketer in, and we're kind of killing it right now, which is fun.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Nancy, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. It's great to see you in person, even greater to be able to have a chance to do this conversation.
It's fun.
Thank you. And huge thanks to Julian and the whole team at Blitzscaling a Startup for putting this together. Nancy and your team for helping promote this and get the word out there. And of course, most importantly, the heroes of this all, the audience members who've been watching throughout this. Do you want to say anything to the audience members? So many of whom I think are here because they're fans of yours.
Oh, that's so cute. Thanks. This was fun. I always love, I love chatting with you. It just felt so comfortable and it was very fun.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Nancy, thank you so much. Everyone else out there in the audience, we are so grateful that you took time out of your busy days to spend time with us. I'm glad that I think many of you got something out of this. You could hardly not, with Nancy being the person being interviewed, but just huge gratitude. And if you like this, somebody asked, oh my God, how do I get a recording of this? It will go on to YouTube. I think that it'll be on LinkedIn. Nancy, it'll probably be on some of your channels as well. Yeah. There's Blitzscaling a Startup and the Blitzscaling a Startup interviews, and you can subscribe to those podcasts, and you can take in the awesomeness of Nancy Duarte over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Chris. Empathy for the win. Yeah.